Well, good morning, good mid-morning. Thanks for joining us for this panel. We're going to dive into technology and smart on crime, and we'll try and tease out the different things that could mean. I should say first that the panelists before you are not entirely the panelists in your agenda. Malika from Google had a last-minute cancellation, and I'm going to put her on blast a little bit. She's meeting with the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, and apparently thought that was more important than all of you, but I'm not mad about that. So, which is actually great because we were able to shake things up a little bit and get some additional new participants. We've got Kenyatta LEAL here. He's a founding member and returning citizen of the Last Mile program at San Quentin. We've got Jacob SILLS, the founder of Uptrust, a company that sends text message reminders to attend court and other obligations. We have Phil Goff, you might have heard from him yesterday in one of the side panels. He is one of the nation's leading scholars on the phenomenon of implicit bias. We've got Coburn here from the Open Philanthropy Project, and we have Augie Torres from Adovo. So, I just want to say up top that we have taken a kind of a broad interpretation of tech and technology, and I think it will hopefully make for a lively conversation. We're going to hear from tech companies looking to disrupt the current marketplace and the current status quo of criminal justice. We'll hear about how technology and science can capture our implicit biases and maybe hold us accountable to them. We'll talk a little bit about how tech leaders in Silicon Valley are kicking up the criminal justice reform philanthropic sector. And we'll hear from an individual who has used technology in the tech sector as a pathway back to employment. And so with that, what I'll probably do is just have each of our panelists spend some time catching you all up to who they are and what they've been doing, and then we'll take some follow-up questions from there, and then certainly go to the audience for questions after that. So I want to start with you, Kenyatta. Can you tell us about who you are, how you got here, and just a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, and thank everybody for coming today. My name is Crispino Kenyatta LEAL, like Zoe just shared with you, and I'm the manager of campus services, and I deal with inside sales at Rocket Space. I'm also a founding member and sitting board member of the Last Mile program at San Quentin. And up until about 4.5 years ago, though, I was commonly referred to as inmate number H10983. I spent about 19 years in the California prison system under California's 3 strikes law, and I was sentenced to 25 to life for being an ex-felon in possession of a firearm. I entered the prison system at 25 years old, and as you can imagine, I was, really afraid for my future. I didn't know what was going to happen to me with a life sentence, and I was in deep denial about the role that I played in getting myself there. I blamed everybody else. It was the judge, it was the DA, it was, my homie who snitched on me, it was all these other things. But probably about 5 or 6 years into my prison sentence, I came to this inescapable conclusion that I was the problem. I was the one who made the choices. I was the one who put myself in that position, and I was the problem. But with that realization, I also came to the conclusion that if I'm the problem, I must be the solution as well. And so I did the most important thing, probably the most important thing that I did when I was in prison, which was ask for help. And as soon as I started asking for help, it came from all different directions. It came from counselors and family and even other inmates on the yard. And, I can remember one time walking around the yard with this older gentleman, and, he was helping me sort some things out, and he just hit me up. He's like, youngster, what is important to you, where are your priorities at? And he gave me a little piece of paper and a pencil. He said, write down the 10 most important things in your life. And so I wrote them down on a piece of paper, gave it to him. He looked at me square in the eye and said, youngster, you got 24 hours in a day. You work 8 hours and you sleep 8 hours. How many of those remaining 8 hours do you devote to these things that you say are important to you? And right then it was like a kick in the gut for me, because I realized that while I was talking about what was important to me, I wasn't living it out every day of my life. And so right then I began to align my actions with my beliefs, and slowly but surely began to retake control of my life inside an incarcerated setting. You know, I said that my family was important to me, so I started rebuilding those bonds with them. I said that my education was important to me. I went back to school. I got my college degree through the Prison University Project at San Quentin. Became the first person in my family to graduate from college inside prison. I also said that my community was important to me, you know, and so I started trying to figure out ways that I could add value to my community. And at the time, my community was San Quentin. So I became a tutor and a mentor and a facilitator and a founder of other programs there. And that's where I met a gentleman by the name of Chris Redlitz. He's a venture capitalist in San Francisco. He had come to San Quentin to give a talk about business and entrepreneurship. And for me, I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I just used it in the wrong way. So I felt like this is a great opportunity for me to transform my hustle, so to speak, and do things the right way. And so I met with Chris and his wife, Beverly. We formulated the initial curriculum for the Last Mile program. Initially, we focused on just pure entrepreneurship, but in 2014, we shifted towards coding. And so we started the first coding development boot camp inside a prison setting. And today, I'm proud to say that we've graduated over 200 people in the program. We have 25 returned citizens who are now all in the community doing fantastic work. And we feel like, you know, there are a lot of different factors that come into play for a person's successful reentry. One of the brothers that was up here talked about spirituality. I firmly believe that that's a huge, you know, factor in that. At the same time, you know, people need jobs, they need training, and so that's what we focus on, training people with 21st century job skills so they can enter the job market and be successful in this digital world that we live in. We build websites for different organizations. In fact, some of our clients are actually here today. Coalition for Public Safety built their website. Dave's Killer Bread Foundation built their website. So if any of y'all need a website built, you know where to go. Check us out, lastmile.org, and we'd be more than happy to help you there. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I just have a bit of a follow-up for you about the program itself. Can you talk about the relationship between the tech community in the Bay Area and San Francisco area and your program, and how you guys have been relating with different tech companies?
Yeah, so the Bay Area has been a fantastic place for us to start the program. You know, there's a lot of innovative thinkers, a lot of, you know, just a progressive mindset in the Bay Area. And Chris and Beverly are venture capitalists, they're VCs, they have a, you know, large portfolio of companies, and so their network is really revolves around, you know, digital media and tech companies. And so they've been able to leverage that network to create opportunities for internships. And some of those internships have turned into full-time jobs. And so we're slowly but surely building that consortium of businesses that'll hire people from our program. And I sit here today as a beneficiary of that. I started off at the company that I'm at right now, Rocket Space, which is a technology accelerator in San Francisco. I started off as an intern there. I've been able to work my way up into a management position, and I just recently transitioned into sales. I didn't go through the coding program because it started after I got out of prison, but the skills that I learned in the program really helped me enter that environment and become successful. And you know, I came into the environment with this mindset that I don't care if I gotta, you know, sweep floors, scrape gum off the floor, make coffee. I'm gonna be the best floor sweeping, gum scraping, coffee making person that they've ever seen. And it's that kind of mindset that's helped me elevate to where I am today. And that's something that we really focus on with the program is hard work, dedication, and staying consistent, believing in the process, and good things can happen.
Thank you, that's tremendous. Jacob, what's Uptrust? Where does it come from? Why'd you found it? What was the problem you were trying to solve for?
Sure. So I'm a co-founder and CEO of Uptrust. Our mission is to keep people out of jail that don't need to be there. And specifically, we focus on technical violations. Our first product is focused on helping people make it to court. Partly because if you miss court, you get a bench warrant and you end up in jail. And more than just that initial jailing, longer term in terms of risk assessments or bail setting, you're much more likely to end up in jail. Should I keep going? No, sorry. Yeah.
Definitely.
And so what we sort of looked at was, you know, initially, you know, how do we keep people out of jail? And to look at this around sort of issues of bail affordability, I started attending bail hearings. And sort of what we saw was a lot of people were missing court who had public defenders. And in the absence of data, prosecutors and judges were often doing this really bad thing, which was conflating attendance risk with flight risk. And so often you'd have 20% of people not making it to court, and people would say, oh, that person's a flight risk, they don't show up to court, I'm gonna set high bail, or I'm not gonna release them. And that seems sort of pretty screwy. And so like, what we did was sort of innovative, I guess, in this context of criminal justice, was we actually asked the defendants what was going on, and we asked what kind of help they might need and why this may be happening. And so, sure enough, it's not that surprising. It was the kinds of things that you probably, also need help with. So people weren't getting the reminder they're getting mailed to the wrong addresses. People needed childcare. They needed rides to court. They had mental health issues. But also, as we dug deeper, there was a lot of social and emotional issues that were involved. People had fear, they had confusion, and we basically thought, okay, wow, there's an opportunity here, because if you knew that no one was fleeing, if people weren't like in Law and Order getting on jets and going to Paris, we could solve that problem. And for us, the focus became you needed to communicate where people need to go. You need to also communicate what types of things people had to prepare for, but you also had to connect them and use technology to connect people to services in their community. So if they needed a ride to court, we might be able to provide them. So with that, we sort of started thinking about what was the right product to build. Sorry, let's go back one. And who are the right sort of counterparties? Because I think one of the problems that technology has is it sort of wants to like eliminate people. And it says we don't need people. And we were like, well, first off, my partner Eli over there and I were sort of the only people sort of on the team. And we were like, well, we can't be in every state or every place to start providing this product. We need allies. And furthermore, as we started looking at it, we tried to say like, well, how would a system work best? So we started with text message, partly because it was cheapest, but also it had the highest open rate. And then we also thought about, well, who are the right people to help us get the right phone numbers, but also get the client information that would allow us to provide a humanized, tailored service. And for that, we went to public defenders, partly because when we started talking to court staff, they said, we want people to show up, but we don't want to know if someone has a problem making it to court. They didn't want that liability. And public defenders were the sort of perfect ally for us, in part because they were already calling their clients every day. And we were able to automate their outreach and save them time. But also, public defenders actually cared about the humans like that they were dealing with, and they really wanted to see this impact. And lastly, with public defenders, what was really important was they were open to two-way communication. Going back to sort of the human process here, we really said, one of the things we look at is sort of the golden rule, right? Like, do unto others as you do unto yourself. And what we sort of started thinking about was like, how would you want to be treated in this system? You wanted people to say please, say thank you, use your first name, not call you by sort of a number or something like that. And so with public defenders, we realized that if a client had an issue, they could communicate that with the public defender and therefore sort of eradicate a lot of these sort of sloppy bench warrants. So for example, we had a case in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, where we turned our system on there, and that first day, a public defender was alerted that their client had a funeral out of state and they would not be attending court that day. And before we sort of had that conduit, that opportunity, by the way, gave the defendant a voice that they can now sort of share, we were able to sort of, the public defender speak to a judge and say, hey, look, I spoke to my client, they're not gonna be there today, can we move the case? And they were able to sort of keep someone out of jail, once again, not for anyone committing a crime, but for literally having trouble managing their calendar. So, we launched about last summer in Contra Costa County, which is a county of about 1 million people in California, and we're now in Philadelphia, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, as well as we'll be launching soon in Baltimore in conjunction with the RFK Center for Human Rights. And one of the things is it's actually been working, arguably better than we expected. 95% of people are showing up to court, up from around 80% in a lot of the jurisdictions we were working before. And where this is really critical from a policy standpoint is the bail lobby will often say that they are required to get people to show up to court. they provide that public good. But it actually turns out that, you know, if you treat people with respect and design a system around their circumstance, you can get the same attendance rate in a much more humanizing way without any monetary sort of obligation. And so that's where this data is really important. Also, people take advantage of the two-way system. You know, I think one of the things that government can borrow from technology is sort of building products and testing them out, figuring out what works and what doesn't. We didn't know what people would write back to us. When we spoke to court systems initially, they said people would write, "Screw you." In actuality, the ¡1 response we get is "thank you," which, you know, when you're trying to start an organization, it's really cool to get thank yous back. We also realized that as a growing organization, we couldn't provide rides and childcare to everyone. Just getting the insurance for ride sharing alone at first was going to be $100,000, and that like broke our budget. But we did realize, well, what could we do if we knew what people needed rides? So we started having public defenders ask questions, and they were, do you have children under the age of 10 and do you require childcare? How are you planning on getting to court? And also, do you have a daily obligation? And where that was really important was, if someone has a job, how do we alert them and remind them to ask for time off work? If someone has childcare needs and there's childcare at the court facility, how do we alert them of these services that are already being provided? So, you know, what we're trying to do now is sort of scale this up. You know, our goal is to sort of work with 1 million people in the next sort of by 2019. And what we're doing there is working with public defenders both on state levels, like in Baltimore. Once we sort of ramp that up in the next 3 months, we'll be able to go statewide in the state of Maryland, but also large cities and counties. The idea there being is, you know, criminal justice systems are so county-based and so localized, and there's no scale. And so by taking this data on a national level, tailoring for individual communities and the resources and assets in the community, we can actually build a platform that takes power away from systems that don't always have, you know, humans, compassion, fiscal responsibility at their core, and actually provide those services in the community vis-a-vis technology. And so where that's really critical, and where I'll finish, is, you know, what our goal is. And it's really to transform the pretrial system from risk-based to needs-based. And while that sort of seems simple and somewhat seems jargony, it's pretty profound. Everyone gets so excited about risk assessments. And the idea there is, you know, what is someone, a 2 or a 3? You know, what kind of questions are we asking? I mean, questions of racial bias, sure. Questions of bias against poor people, 100%. If one of the major questions is, do you, live in a consistent house? Like, how are we deciding someone's, right to be released pre-trial on that? And so, how we sort of think about it is, if you know as a fixed constant that people are gonna not flee, really the question we need to ask is, what services can we provide? And how do we provide those services to safely release almost everyone pre-trial? And that's sort of what we're working on now and what we'll be able to do. So the questions we're gonna be able to ask soon is, we have enough rides data that now we're gonna start saying, well, who needs a ride to court? If you said, I don't know how you're gonna get to court, do we get someone from the community or an Uber or a Lyft to provide you with that? Because it's a lot cheaper to provide someone a ride than to put them in a cage. Not to mention, it's clearly more compassionate. And lastly, try to think about how do you engage the community? Jumping back quickly, there are tons of people in every community that give a shit. And right now, they're sort of locked out of most of the criminal justice process. And for us, whether it's giving rights to court, providing case management, we think sort of our technology can sort of put that power back in the hands of the community, which are gonna do a lot more effective, and to be honest, a lot cheaper job than a lot of these probation departments who are running pretrial services. So with that, our hope is sort of with data, plus technology, plus people, we can keep people out of jail that don't need to be there. Thanks.
So your company is disrupting a couple of paradigms and systems in the larger criminal justice system. One of them is a pretty well-resourced bail industry. How's that working out for you?
So the secret is they don't really, well, maybe they do now, they don't really know about us or care about us, and partly is we sort of play dumb in the sense of, like, we help people make it to court that are released. Now, we're not the best. There's a lot better people here in this room that are better community organizers than we are, that are better advocates. So our view is, let's collect the data and hand it off to people that are better resourced than us to sort of combat that. So it's sort of to sneak up on them, if you will.
Okay. I want to go to Augie Torres over here from Adovo. Can you talk about the problem that you were all trying to solve for and the product that you've created?
Yes, thank you for having us here. My name is Augie Torres. I am also formerly incarcerated. I spent 20 years in the Department of Corrections in Illinois. I went to prison when I was 16 years old. One thing that I quickly learned while I was incarcerated was that there's not many rehabilitative services while you're locked up. There's few and far in between, at least where I was at, the facilities that I was placed in. And they're very scarce within that facility itself as well. So there's a lot of waiting lists. Some people spend maybe a year or two in a waiting list waiting to even take their GED. And after getting the GED, you might spend another year or two trying to get on a program to start taking some college courses. So it took me about, I would say, about a year or two to get my GED. After I initially got into the program, it took me a few months. After that, I got my associate's degree back in, I believe it was like 2000 or 2001. So from there until I was released in 2014, I worked on my bachelor's degree. I wasn't able to complete it while incarcerated because a lot of different facilities didn't have access to higher education. So I completed it once I was released. I just graduated about a year ago. So just putting that into perspective is if somebody wants to really utilize that time and educate themselves, even if they had 20 years to say, you know, I want to get my master's degree and I want to do this and I want to do that with myself, the reality is that it would be extremely difficult for them to reach that goal even with 20 years on their hands. So what Adovo does is it brings education and communication into the carceral setting. The way we do that is we do it via technology. We've developed software and we put that software onto educational tablets. We work with Samsung, and what we do is we ask facilities to bring that tablet into the facility and disperse it to the population. And of course, we want to make sure that everybody has access to that education free of charge. So there are a couple of other players in the market that are doing something similar. But what differentiates us from them is that we make sure that the end user, the person who is incarcerated, never pays a cent for that education, and that the facility takes on the responsibility of financing that. Other players in the market, what they do is they'll give the tablets for free to the facilities, and then they'll load the tablets with a lot of entertainment, music, movies, and they'll have some education on them. And then they'll charge the end user per minute fee to use the tablets. So, of course, a lot of people want to watch movies and listen to music, and the facilities end up revenue sharing with those companies. So they're incentivized, those facilities are incentivized to contract with those who actually put some money in their pockets instead of asking them, hey, would you be willing to pay for some educational tools for your population? So that's what we've been able to do. We've also recently acquired a relatively small telecommunications company. And what we're doing is we understand that communication between those who are incarcerated and those who are still on the outside, you know, family and friends, is crucial to recidivism, just as education is. Education has been shown to reduce recidivism dramatically, and so does communication. So we believe that the combination of those two things put together really make a huge impact on the incarcerated population. Our end goal is to reduce the prison population in the United States. We've all heard a bunch of numbers thrown out, and we're all very familiar with our incarceration rate here in the United States. And that's something that we need to work on, and I believe that technology is definitely a way to tackle that problem, or at least parts of that problem, because some of the things that we run into when speaking with facilities, a lot of facilities love our product. They love our idea, they love our concept, they love our mission. But at the end of the day, they have to figure out how to pay for it, right? So they're put in a situation where they say, you know what, I would love to somehow get Edovo into our facility, but I have to speak with, a few people first and see if we can put into our budget for next year. So that is the reality. It's even more expensive to hire teachers and to bring them into the facility and ask them to teach the entire population. Of course, you can't duplicate that interaction between a real life teacher and a student. That connection that somebody makes with their teacher and their student, that's, you cannot replicate it with technology, but it's a lot more expensive to bring somebody in from the streets and teach than to have technology not be a replacement, but be I want to say like a, definitely not a substitute, but more like a tool that takes the place of what's lacking, just for a very small period of time until those facilities and those departments can begin to realize that the impact of education is worth spending that money on teachers coming in and teaching the population.
Thanks, Augie. Chloe, you've worked in many positions in criminal justice, and recently, over the course of the last several years, have been working for Open Philanthropy, which is founded by leaders in the tech industry. I wanted to hear from you a little bit about what you think is different about this new interest from tech leaders in criminal justice, and what is in the kind of DNA of some of these foundations that are coming from this young and kind of young tech sector. What does it mean for us? What's good about it? What's maybe not good about it?
Okay, hi everyone, Chloe Coburn. I'm based here in New York. I'm a lawyer by training and and have thought about basically nothing other than criminal justice for 13 years. I've litigated, I've done policy, and then just for the past couple of years, as Zoe said, I've worked with a thing called Open Philanthropy based in San Francisco, which makes recommendations to major donors on various issues of interest. Our main donors are Dustin Moskovitz and Carrie Tuna. Dustin was a co-founder of Facebook with Mark Zuckerberg and helped run it for several years. So a couple of years ago, they tasked the sort of leaders of Open Philanthropy with identifying causes across a really wide array of topical areas that were important, tractable, and neglected, because they wanted their resources to do the most good in the world. It's a very sort of open-ended task. They said, we're too rich. It vacillates, but something like $12 billion they want to give away in their lifetime. And they said that we have too much just to pick areas of interest to us, this particular cause or this thing that we care about because we feel an emotional connection. Instead, they said, go research and find out where our money is most needed. So among other areas, criminal justice reform came up, in part because at the time there was much less philanthropic interest in the topic. That's changed in the past couple of years. It's quite stunning, actually. It's hard to count because there's a lot of money that you don't see, and then it depends on how you define things. But let's say there was roughly $80 million a year going towards criminal justice reform 2 years ago. And now, again, it's still hard to count, but let's say it's more like $200 million a year in this short amount of time. So there's a huge amount of interest, including from multiple tech donors. Chan Zuckerberg Initiatives has recently announced a number of grants in this area as well. So it's really exciting to be in the middle of it. And we're very much at the beginning. Philanthropy at this next sort of more intense level of giving is at the beginning. And then as you can see, there's just, you probably get the sense from this whole conference, but then just from what's happening on the stage here. There's so many brilliant folks, and especially including people who are formerly incarcerated or in other ways directly impacted, who are bringing their minds together at once to figure out these challenges, both in terms of technical challenges within the criminal justice system, and then advocacy and political challenges outside to say, how has this issue fit within our social framework? So it has that kind of explosive moment that feels well suited to tech, that kind of quick adaptive energy, that embracement of risk, this sense that, we'll try things, they may not work, let's invest in people and ideas. What I'm thankful for is that, this is going to potentially sound odd, but I'm very glad to be in the middle of that, because it's that beautiful, explosive tech, creative energy can also lead to not great results sometimes. People might say, let's just solve the whole thing. We'll put $100 million into this idea we came up with in, Palo Alto, and it's not actually well suited to the ground, to the actual conditions they're trying to address. So what my colleagues did, when they were looking for someone to help direct their work, they placed a huge emphasis on someone who was deep in the work and knew a lot of things. And I'm sure they interviewed many great people, but the fact is that's what they were looking for. Someone who had expertise and relationships and would actually have a sense of how the money was going to connect to the ground. So I'm grateful for that, because it wouldn't necessarily have to go that way. You could have tons of tech money going to just kind of weird ideas that weren't going to be that helpful. I'm hopeful that a lot of what I'm resourcing is going to be helpful. It's not all going to work, but at least there's that ethic to it, which I appreciate. So it's a kind of a great, combination, again, of youthful, risk tolerant energy, and then also humility, modesty, and being interested in listening to the ground. I guess the last thing I'll say is I just have been very, I've been really pleasantly surprised. I thought that, and Phil may totally contradicts me, but I thought that I was like, I'm going to go to Silicon Valley, and they don't understand anything about race, and they don't understand anything about politics, and I'm just going to have to be really sneaky, because I'm like an East Coast, advocate. And in fact, I didn't give them enough credit. There's a lot of really interesting, thoughtful, smart people out there. I don't think they come at it with the same social justice kind of frames as we might often see on the East Coast, but there is a very strong commitment to doing the most good and getting, nonsense out of the way to get there. And so, they didn't blink an eye when I recommended, a very large grant to the Close Rikers campaign led by Glenn Martin. There wasn't well, what's his capacity? And, do we know it'll work? That's been the sort of thinking that's prevented some of our most exciting leaders from having really substantial resources and runway to do their work. So, there's not enough, it's a lot of money, but it's totally inadequate to the task, so it's not like everyone who's amazing can be really properly supported, but we at least have the right, I think, a good mindset to help go after that. So the last thing I just want to say, though, to connect to what else is going on in this panel, so my resources tend to go to sort of advocacy, politics, organizing, power building, pressure building, that kind of stuff. I think that this sort of for-profit industry, for-profit, but B Corp type stuff that's going on up here on the stage is really exciting and is so important, because there's, I think, increasing pressure from impact investors who want to get into this space. And I want to say, most people who want to make money off of criminal justice, you should run away from screaming. And so it's really great. I've known Jacob for a couple of years, just meeting you guys, just your leadership is so critical. I want you to just be way out there in front, because I think you have integrity and good, intentions to actually help, and there's plenty of others who don't. So I would I suppose, colleagues in my realm of nonprofit advocacy or whatever, to do a better job of knowing about you guys and lifting you up, so that money that doesn't want to just that wants to go towards impact investing knows where to find a home instead of landing in some terrible place. So thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you for that. Before we start to draw some connections here, I wanted to let Phil break down race and technology. Are you ready for that?
Not remotely.
He's
no.
also not, he's told me he's not going to take any questions. So we're hoping that we'll just get everything out in this first presentation. Phil.
No, that's right. I have this mic only so I can drop it at the end now. Lower your expectations. I don't know how to talk about anything meaningful while seated, which is a problem if you're having dinner with me. But I'm hoping that nobody's going to mind if I kind of head over this way, because I have slides up here that we're hoping are going to work. Hey, look, it's me. Does this thing work? Can I do this? No? Okay, great. Oh, it did work, just for a second. Whatever, I'm going to roam. I'll be Phil Donahue. So I am easily the least impressive person up here. I have not had to overcome my own justice involvement. I have not invented anything meaningful. I am not giving away millions of dollars anywhere. I am the person who has been able to interact at the intersection of all of this stuff because of some of the generosity that we're seeing coming out of Silicon Valley. I am here proudly at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Welcome to all of you. I heard a woo. My president must be here. There we go. And I also run the Center for Policing Equity. And we've been dealing with the problem of how to think about and then fix issues of race in policing, right? And we pretty much fixed it, but up until then, here it sort of encapsulates for me, because it's been the world I've been living in, but as I see it in other phases of criminal justice, some of the promise and the perils of dealing with tech investment and the sort of tech ethos around criminal justice reform. So let me walk you through a little bit about what that looks like for us, and how tech has helped, and what I'm worried about, if that makes some sense. So I got started a number of years ago, and one of the very first meetings I ever had was with a chief from a Midwestern city. And he said, Doc, I got this concern. Our racial profiling numbers are better than the county. Right? Here in the city, we're better than the county. But I don't really know if that means that we're great and the county's just okay, if they're awful and we're just slightly less awful, or if they're terrible and we're great. I can't tell you any of that, but I can tell you that we're one dead black teenager away from this whole place burning to the ground. That's striking for a number of reasons. One, if I hadn't told you it was in the Midwest, if I had lied and told you it was on the West Coast, that's super believable. Or in the South, or the Mountain West, or the Northeast, anywhere in the United States. It also encapsulates the three major issues that I see in reckoning with race in policing, which are roughly that first, our definition of racism is massively outdated. The way we think about it is terribly bad. Now, that used to be a harder sell for most audiences, but there are some good things that have come out of the most recent political context that we're in, where people are arguing about whether or not, yeah, you know what, I don't even have to. The definition of racism that we've got and we've been focusing on is outdated. We also don't have really good measures of how to think about bias as opposed to disparity. And then in the context of policing, we have absolutely no national data. Not on what police officers do. We have really terrible data on crimes that get committed, but nothing national on what police officers do. So we have a terrible definition. Even if we had a definition, we wouldn't know how to measure it. And if we tried to figure out how to measure it, we wouldn't have the data to do it. Very inspiring, right? All right. So I want to take a little bit of time on each of those, because again, this is part of where I think the promise and the peril come from. Let's talk about just the definition. So think about how you would define what causes discrimination. What causes racism? What's the seed of it? What's the root of it? And even if you're very sophisticated, if you answer that question for the lay public, the answer tends to be bad people, right? The color of the devil changes depending on how you're thinking about it, right? What kind of discrimination, but it's bad people. And the problem is that doesn't really fit with the data. And here's what I mean by that. This is from what they refer to as the Princeton Trilogy. I'm a Harvard guy. I assume that's because people at Princeton can't count past 3. This is clearly 5 time courses of data. But these are negative stereotypes about black people and the percentage of white people that endorse those negative stereotypes. What you see up here is that it gets better. This isn't just political correctness and figuring out the right set of things to say, right? It actually gets better. And then we ended racism in 2000. We elected a black president. And it was all the way cleared, right? All cured. That used to be a funny joke. So that's prejudice, right? That's bad people. That's hearts and minds. This is inequality. This is expressed as a black-white ratio. So if black children were as likely to die as white children in infancy, we'd see these bars here at the white line of 1. Not only do you see that infant mortality is above 1, but for infant mortality, unemployment, and poverty, these things are going up. Right? They're going up. Prejudice has improved, inequality not so much. And this is part of the conundrum in policing. In the face of declining prejudice, people are experiencing persistent and even increasing inequality. And how the heck do you make sense of that and then fix it? That's part of the issue in policing, is we haven't had a good theory for that. And that's part of where my lab, when I was just a wee social psychologist, started thinking about how to deal with this in the context of policing. So I want to tell you just a couple of stories before I get done with PowerPoint stuff here. And here's the first one. So I was doing this research on what causes racial disparities in police use of force. I was doing it in Denver, Colorado. And we had this idea that if we brought people in the use of deadly force simulation facility, which for the nerds in the room is like the X-Men's Danger Room, and just a couple nerds, I now know where you are, thank you. But for everybody else, it's a room where one entire wall is a projection screen, right? They've got an actual 9mm pistol. It's been retrofitted with a laser pointer so we can see when and if they shoot. We figured if we brought them in there, that concern with being seen as racist would actually be a better predictor of racial disparities in use of force. Why? Anybody who's dealt with folks in law enforcement understands you got to control a situation in order to be safe. If you're not going to do what I say, one of us might get hurt. I usually use my moral authority and my social skills to control a situation, but if you think I'm racist, I've got no moral authority. That means I got to use my coercive physical force in order to get compliance. So we thought that that would be the case, but secretly, in my head, I thought, nah, racist cops are just going to do racist things. As luck would have it, I'm walking out of the police academy when this is going on, when this first starts, right? Some of you guys got the chance to see this yesterday. I encountered this guy while I'm walking with the chief and a district commander. This guy's in plain clothes, clearly here for my study, and says, "Hey, chief, who's the guy in the suit?" And the chief, of course, says, "That's Dr. Phil, because that's my curse." And he looks very confused. He says, "Wait, you're the researcher?" I said, "Yeah." "You, like, have a PhD?" "Yeah." "Sorry, man. I don't like black people." "Thank you so much for showing up to my study on racism and policing. Right this way, sir." So this guy, turns out, he's high on explicit bias, high on implicit bias, high on aversive racism, symbolic racism, modern racism. He's an Olympic athlete in racism. He trains in the offseason. He's going to beat your high score, okay? He's a racist. He's a bigot. But he's low in terms of his concern with you thinking he's a bigot. He's a bigot and doesn't care. So in our use of deadly force training simulation, this is what that looks like. Oh, and we should stop recording right about now, because these are HIPAA protected, so everybody should not take pictures, otherwise you're committing a federal offense, and nobody wants that. We good? Yes? Okay, great.
What are you doing? Yeah? You like that one? You like sticks? Yeah, you know, that ain't nice to say, huh? Hey. Well, you know, people are getting scared because you're waving that stick around and banging on stuff. Well, other people don't like it. What do you think?
You just feel all the racism oozing out of him, right? It was the most racist interaction with so much just racism with racist sauce drizzled on. Just no. No. He saw someone who was mentally distressed. He de-escalated like most of the officers in the experiment did. Okay? This bigot didn't behave in a bigoted fashion towards that individual African American. Now, I wasn't in the building for this next guy, but I did look at his chart by the time that we were done. This next guy, I'm going to show you, he's one of the only white dues-paying members of the Black Peace Officers Association in Denver at the time. So for sure, some of his best friends were black. Right? Not only that, but some of his best siblings were black. He had 2 adopted black siblings, and I have it on good authority that he only dated sisters. So he called himself a woke white dude, okay? Low bias, explicit, low implicit bias, but very concerned about being seen as racist in doing his job. Now this is him responding to the exact same stimulus, the exact same suspect.
Denver police, drop the fucking stick right now! Drop the fucking stick! Denver police, drop the stick, asshole! Drop it! Drop the stick!
We're good on the recordings. So this is an individual who chooses to take someone's life. I didn't show you for time constraints, I didn't show you the video that they saw. It's an in-policy shooting. It's also a shooting that probably didn't need to happen. Most of the officers don't shoot. And here for me is the important take-home. If we're looking for bigots, which is most people's theory of what's going on with race and policing, then we bench the first officer, which, by the way, I'm totally okay with. But we missed the second one, and that should be unacceptable. We're going to need accountability systems that deal with both, right? So how do you do that in a context as complicated as policing, right? I can't bring everybody into one of my studies and then say, well, this is how you did in the study, and therefore, right? So what we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years now is building the National Justice Database. It's the largest database of police behavior in the world. It's a low bar, but we're still proud. It covers about a third of the United States by population. And what it does is we collect data on police behavior. That's pedestrian stops, vehicle stops, use of force. We do a climate survey, so we've got things like explicit and implicit bias for a majority of officers in the cities that participate fully with us. We do policy analysis, both quantitative and best practices. And then when we can, we do residential surveys as well, so we've got the attitudes, biases, experiences of community members. Right? So those voices are back there. It's a very complicated process. To do the right job of doing the right set of analyses takes a long, long time. And it was, frankly, not something that was scalable. This is where tech came in for us. We call it the Google factor. So some of you may have read that earlier in this year, Google made a huge monetary investment, at least as far as I was concerned. It's more money than I will likely make in my lifetime. But that was not nearly as important as the next thing they did, which is they committed a team of engineers to us. And right now, they are in a very dark room down by Chelsea Market working on building a software. That software automates the extraction of data from police departments, the standardization, the cleaning, the analysis, and the English language translation of that analysis. And here's what that means for law enforcement and for communities that are supposed to be protected by them. It takes us about 9 to 12 months to write a report right now. I take about 3 PhD level researchers, I cut off their eyelids, I put them in a cage, they're allowed to come out when they're done writing. 9 to 12 months. By the time that we're done building this software, which will be at the end of the calendar year, it will take about 9 to 12 minutes. That means every police department in the country can find out not just what are the disparities, but what is our contribution to those disparities. And the deal with the communities have really enjoyed this. They've been more excited than law enforcement because they get to say, we always knew it wasn't just the cops. It's the school districts as well. It's the jobs and not having them. It's the healthcare system, all of which we're able to put into the model. So they're excited about it, and we're excited about it. It's all very, very exciting. To me, this is the promise of tech, is that they have the ability to make huge bets and have huge shocks of resources into something that could not get done just by hand. They have the power to magnify the potential of the human spirit and human skill sets, right? So with those resources, right, it's important to get, why did I draw you through all of this stuff? It wasn't to tell you about CPE, Scouts Honor. That's a side benefit. The real deal is, in much of the tech spaces that I've dealt with, these are professional nerds like myself, okay? In fact, they call themselves professional geeks. We're the nerds. We get geeks and nerd. We have fights. It's a lot of slapping. But the long and short of it is we all deal with data. And so it's fun to think that data can be a solve for this. And it's true in law enforcement. If you hold police departments and shift lieutenants accountable for their data, not just in terms of crimes, but also in terms of metrics of justice. I see Vera here doing CompStat 2.0. Think about this as CompStat for racial disparities. That we can reduce the racial disparities. It's very, very exciting, but it's only as useful as the theory that's driving the data collection. Data are only as useful as the theory that drives it, and that creates a problem. Because if everybody gets together and says, we think we've got big bets over here, what are they ignoring over there? You've got a narrow focus or the wrong sets of people. Glenn Martin likes to say the people who are closest to the problem are the closest to the solution, and usually the ones kept furthest away from the resources. This is an issue as tech begins to make huge bets. Because the data will lead you is always a false prophet. Right? So we can go fast, but in what direction? And we can go certain and confidently. We can do evidence-based, not just evidence-informed, but at what cost? What are we leaving off the table? I think, frankly, she's far away from me, so if I'm embarrassing her, it'll take her a little while to get to me. I think what Chloe's been doing at Open Philanthropy is one of it's one of the model stories for making sure you're making the right sets of bets because you're talking to the people both on the ground and the people who've been thinking about this for a long time. But I think we have a question as a field, as an industry, if you will, is how do we work if tech becomes a monopoly? How do we think through this if there's one business sector which has a deep culture that is unfamiliar to folks who are not in it. And then they become the owners of much of the nonprofit space, moving from 80 million to 200 million in the course of 2 years, with estimates of 500 million coming annually in the course of the next 5 years. That swamps everything that traditional philanthropy has been doing. And so if we don't have the right sets of theories set up to solve our problems, we're in danger that the wrong sets of voices will be amplified and the wrong sets of problems are going to get solved. My home base is racism. That's the thing I study, right? Within that, I study policing. And our theories in that space are absolutely antiquated. They're completely divorced from the experiences of black and brown people who've been catching hell for the last 25 years. Black and brown people have been catching hell for longer than that, but for the last 25 years, the theory is completely divorced from that. How much more so the way that we've been thinking about criminal justice without the voices of justice-involved individuals? So that's a question. I don't have an answer other than to say, given the space that we're in and the tremendous opportunities that are in front of us, I will say we got to organize. We got to get the theories right. We got to decide on what the set of big bets are, which means that the folks who have, and forgive me for saying this, but it's a big space, but an intimate group of folks here. We've been fighting like the first chapter of Invisible Man, Battle Royale, for electrified coins that people have been giving to us, right? And many of us who eat off of this, I'm fortunate, I'm faculty. I don't draw a salary from CPE. My only salary is because Carol lets me make it, right? And that's stable, because tenure is a nice thing to have. But for the folks who eat off of this, how often have you found yourself looking at somebody over in the same kind of space and thinking, I bet we could do that. Yeah, that's great, but our thing is better, or our thing is good too, and why can't we? And too often what that does is it prevents us from sharing and figuring out and building what are the collaborative big bets. And my concern is 2-3 years from now, it's going to be too late to figure out what the right sets of theories are, because we're going to be too far down the road on many of these things to go backwards. Because philanthropy has a momentum of its own. Right? Silicon Valley is new to this. They won't be new to this in 5 years. They're going to be looking for results on the things they've already funded. So my hope is, as we're opening up to questions, I have 22 more minutes to talk? No? Okay. As we open this up to questions, that we're going to be able to have a conversation, not just in terms of what tech can build for us, but what tech ownership does to us and with us, and what our responsibility is as they are getting comfortable making our wildest dreams possible. All right, that'll be it.
Thank you, Professor. Before we throw the questions out to the audience, I just want to do a couple of sort of circle ups with some of the, Chloe touched on this point, but I wanted to dig in a little bit deeper on the companies that are here, and to talk about, to Phil's point around how do we, I just want to hear from Jacob and from Augie about how you are growing businesses, for-profit businesses and companies, and leading with a moral core in a field that has a really rough history and frankly current reality of for-profit companies not being very based in a moral core. I'd just like to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's not easy. That's the short answer. The long answer is that we have to make sure that our values drive every decision that we make. We've written down our values, and we go over them all the time. We have meetings, and we sit down and we talk about our values, and we make sure that everybody on the team, first of all, everybody on the team contributed to the values, so it wasn't just one person came up with these values, but so we make sure that when we're making the decisions that we're making them with the mindset of, our values come first, and then we make the decision based on our values. So in the space that we work in, a lot of people are profiting from those who are incarcerated, and we are in a position where if we become successful, we can take out those giant companies that have just been making hand over fist of money from those who are locked up. That's the reason we got into telecommunications as well, because it's very expensive to make a phone call from prison or a jail to somebody who you love. And a lot of people who are incarcerated have family members. They're a father, they're an uncle, they're a mother, they're a sister to somebody. So staying in contact is essential to having a successful reentry after incarceration. So with those huge contracts that are paid out to some of these companies by facilities and states, comes revenue sharing, and revenue sharing for the facilities. So that's very enticing for the states and for the facilities. So our job is not easy, but the more we speak on what our values are and what our mission is, and the more we're able to sit down and have these conversations with those who are in positions to make these decisions to either bring us in or bring somebody in, they're able to really see that the importance of lowering these prices of communication and of bringing in education free of charge to those who are incarcerated. Because if a company can bring in communications and education, but if they're charging huge amounts of money to those who are incarcerated, then it defeats the purpose, because only a select few are be able to afford that, and that's not a model that's gonna work, because the majority of people who are incarcerated come from a background where they did not have access to resources, financial resources, and many times that's the reason why they are in the position that they are in.
So quickly, I guess I would just say, like, practically the biggest issue about a business in this space is, as a business, you want to think about your customer. And your customer, if you're trying to sell into sort of the criminal justice system, usually doesn't give a shit about people going through the system. And so, whereas in tech, usually you're trying to think about the end user. And those are two different things here. So if you think about yourself too limited and try to just sell product to your customer who's paying you, you can often go awry if you don't think about sort of the values, and which is one of the things we always try to say is, if we ever have a request for a feature, we say, does this help the end user? If it doesn't, like we've been asked to build geolocation into our product, we won't build it. Secondly, it's an issue about the capital formation exercise, which is to say, money comes in as an investment and wants to see a return. And so it's tricky, I think, in this space to find the right investors. So for us, our only outside investor that we would take initially was like the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, because they were understood that we weren't going to necessarily maximize in the short term profit over impact.
Thank you. Great. Kenyatta, I want to hear a little bit more about your what you're thinking with the last mile or programs like it, in terms of how we can scale these programs. You hear incredible stories, especially coming out of of California, where a lot of this innovation has been happening. And I'm just so curious. Last mile, when it started, you were one of the first founding members. Now you were saying, graduated 500 people, 200 people?
Actually, 200. Excuse me,
how do
200.
How do we grow it? What's stopping it from growing?
Well, the focus really at the last mile has been not really to just scale immediately and go to every single prison right away and go shallow and wide. We're really focused on going narrow and really deep with what we're doing. We're trying to really bring a sustainable program to the table, so that when we do scale, it doesn't fall apart in 5 years, 3, 4, 5 years. We want the last mile to continue into the future and create pathways to economics, sustainability for the people inside prison. When they get out, they can, break the cycle of incarceration for themselves, their families, and then the community. So yeah, that's where we're at. We're really focused on just building the best product that we can to take to the other places. We've had interest from 30 other states so far, and so the interest has been there. And I got to give it to Chris and Beverly, because they come from a lean startup mentality, and they've brought that kind of mentality to this nonprofit. And what we're building right now is something that I think is you're going to be hearing about it for years to come.
Can I just say on the scale point, obviously scale is like a beloved word of tech. And then just being in this work, of course, why wouldn't you want like the good things to be as big as possible, as fast as possible, helping as many people as possible? So I'm like sympathetic to that. I've also, and then in terms of thinking about this problem, so many of the at least advocacy solutions that I've been a part of, both as a practitioner now as and as a funder, haven't felt like they're on the path to scale, and so that's a frustration. At the same time, it's really hard for me to sort of hear this, but I think it's important. Like, this is, as you know, Vanita was saying, I suppose yesterday, people talk about it being a 40-year problem. It's more like a 400 or 4,000-year problem. It's an old problem. The problem's underneath the problems, though the ramp up has been recent. The sorts of structures we're talking about, the race and so, like, racial dynamics in this country at least, are really go very deep. So it's, what I'm trying to hold is to move quickly and establish some values and an approach and invest in like big ideas, but with the long view and the sense that like if we're really going to take this on and if we're really going to accomplish the goal, which for me is ending mass incarceration in the deeper sense of the word, not just reducing the number of people in jails and prisons, but ending incarcerated communities in this country, it's going to take a lot of time. And thinking about what are the deep, long relationships that have to be built between and across different parts of the ecosystem in order to sustain that type of effort. And then what is the role of philanthropy in relationship to that? Knowing, by the way, that I have no none of these donors in tech are like, we're in for 20 years. I mean, they say we're risk tolerant and we can be patient. At the same time, they're always looking for how to do the most good. So if you could like cure, malaria tomorrow with $12 billion, I think they'd probably do it. Because that would to them be the highest good, and then potentially leaving this in the lurch. I don't mean to say that I think that tech folks like are irresponsible. I think that they recognize like that once you start investing in a space, you have to probably follow through on that. But it's a tension: move fast, move slow, build deep, go wide. Like all of these things holding at once. And all I can say is like we're just trying to do our best with that, as I suppose everyone in this room is as well.
Thank you. I want to save some time for questions from the audience. There's probably microphones moving around. Are there any? Yeah, right down here. Great.
Hi, my name's Kristen. I'm with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, and I'm a Southerner on a mission to make the South the best place it can be. And one of the problems I struggle with as someone who went to Stanford and spent 4 years in the Silicon Valley is that coming back to the South, there's not a lot of people doing this work in tech, and it's very limited in resources. But there's also a problem that a lot of these criminal justice organizations in the South don't know what technology could do for them. So I know the professors at Stanford to talk to about some of these things and might come to conferences like these and might see some of this, but even most of our officers are lawyers who don't even know that there might be a code that could be written to save them so many hours of time or to find these research opportunities. And so I have a two-part question of how can we help criminal justice organizations that don't come from the major cities or major urban areas understand how to use tech for their work, and then also how can we build up this technology support system for when they do know how to use the tech and want to implement it in their organization?
Thank you. I'm going to put you on the spot, Jacob, because we had a great discussion about Mississippi earlier, and then we'll open it up to the larger panel.
Sure. So I think a few things. So one is sometimes people there needs to be a demystification of tech. And so the system that Eli and I built to start was not some app that required $20 million from venture capital funding. So I think some of it is just understanding what's out there. Some of it's leveraging organizations that do want to do good. So there's one Benetech, there's also Code for America, and find local groups that are able to provide these services. I guess as it relates to certain areas in the South, yeah, it's tricky. We're trying to figure out ways to work in Mississippi, and it's tough because there's not a county-funded public defender. And so how do we sort of tie into their system and provide our outreach? It's tricky. So to some extent, it's sort of a chicken and the egg problem. It's a technology issue, but it's also sort of structural.
Bakir Mujahid of the Southern Coalition for Social Justice and All of Us Are None, which is an organization comprised of formerly incarcerated individuals and their family. I work with this intelligent young lady in the South, and what she says is true. I have something to say to your name, sir, with the glasses. Yes, sir, to the right of Mr. SILLS. Yes, sir. Your name again? Me? You, sir.
Me.
You.
Phil.
Phil. I'm a community organizer, so the value of what you said, that we must organize and keep the impacted ones involved in the influence of data is very important. So I'm going to take that back into what I'm doing. But Mr. Sills, what you're doing is a very wonderful thing as far as participatory defense goes, helping people get to court so they don't get jammed up with them FTAs. I'm amazed, you know, they had this thing called Trap Star, and, you know, it's to stop people from getting caught up in traffic stops. But it's information fed by the individual that rides by and see the stop. Does each attorney, you know, put that data in each and every case they have?
So in terms of like how our stuff works, so
Yes,
what
sir.
we do is we tie into like the county case management system or the public defender, and so they just have to give us some information about the needs, and then we're able to tie in and say, oh, we know, you know, Jacob's got a court date in a week. We know he has a, you know, he goes to school, so let's remind him to, you know, make sure to manage his schedule. So we can take all that and automate it.
Okay. And how can I get that to Durham, North Carolina, if it's
We
not?
can talk afterwards.
Thank you. All right. And another thing, I learned something about apparel, sir. In the state of Oklahoma, they have automatic card readers that can scan the technology, that can scan your money and account and seize it. Were you aware of that? The state of Oklahoma's law enforcement department. Do you have anything to counter that, or how can we resist that coming here?
Question. I don't think I heard it all the way. Yes,
Yeah,
follow the mic.
were you aware that law enforcement in the state of Oklahoma has a device that can read your card and seize the money off of it should they believe that the money is associated with an illicit activity?
So you're saying read your card, meaning like a credit card or a debit
Yes,
card.
sir.
And they can actually seize money from the.
Yes, sir.
You educating me? No.
Okay. Okay, well, I challenge you to look it up, and then it's apparel that has me very paranoid, you know, because black men are getting tackled for concealed open carry guns. So imagine if you dress nice and the money you got was your income tax. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have more questions? Final thoughts from any of the panelists here?
I just want to say that, you know, there are so many men and women on the inside who are serving time right now who are just, you know, working really, really hard to transform their lives. And it's conferences like this, people, concerned citizens out here coming from all different, you know, backgrounds and different organizations coming together to speak on these issues and take next steps to move things forward. You know, it's easy to lose hope. You know, when you're on the inside, you're not aware of these kind of conferences that are happening. And, you know, I'm going into CIW. We're launching the program there, Last Mile at California Institute for Women next week. And I can't wait to share with them what I saw here over the last 2 days, you know, all the passion and work that's gone into this. And I just feel really hopeful about the future, and I plan on sharing that hope with them when I go there next week. So thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you to all our panelists. Thank you for joining us.